The tariff increase would raise an additional 18.2 billion.
We have the required security of supply for 2010.
35% per annum for 3 years in a row, we simply cannot afford it.
The demand for electricity doesn't seem to have been deterred by last year's 31% increase.
Cost to the economy.
With the hope that you will make the right decision.
Infrastructure.
Rising electricity prices.
Welcome back to the CNBC Africa special. This week, NERSA decides on power utility Eskom's application for a 35% tariff hike for the next 3 years. But is this just an easy solution to a very complex problem? Why aren't private producers firmly integrated in the power supply chain when, in 1998, government highlighted that the entrance of the private sector was key to the future of the energy industry? There's no simple answers to these questions, but at the core lies policy, planning and leadership.
To ensure reliable power supply, we have established an interministerial committee on energy to develop a 20-year integrated resource plan. Among other things, this will look at the participation of independent power producers and protecting the poor from rising electricity prices. We will establish an independent system operator, separate from Eskom Holdings.
All players in the energy field breathed a muted sigh of relief this year as President Jacob Zuma made his State of the Nation address. Even Eskom has realized it can't supply all the country's electricity needs on its own. And with the looming increase in tariffs combined with an independent systems operator, the market opens up for independent power producers.
We have been advocating very strongly, and we have welcomed the decision that has been taken by government as announced by the President last week. We have been saying that one of the challenges that you have in South Africa is that you've got an Eskom which is both referee and player, and it becomes very difficult, and part of probably what has held back development in this country in the electricity and energy industry broadly is because of that concentration of the powers in one institution. And therefore we strongly welcome the decision now to set up an independent agency that will be independent of Eskom to be able to adjudicate on decisions for independent players who want to produce electricity, not to be subjected to be scrutinized and decided upon by somebody who is at the same time competing with them in energy generation. So we really hope, because this is also going to assist in the long term to making energy supply in this country competitive.
Eskom on its own will not address the problems we are experiencing within the short and the medium term. I think together with IPPs we would be able to address the supply side issues in the country. The formation of the independent system operator and the market operator is a perfect step. It's in the right direction. The ideal situation would be an independent transmission operator, system operator, which would include the grid and make it neutral, not under the control of Eskom. Then all power producers would be able to compete for supplying power on the same level playing field.
Everyone's in agreement that the introduction of an independent systems operator is a step in the right direction. But at the same time, many are asking what it is that President Zuma was saying in his State of the Nation address that hasn't been said before.
They're all positive developments that were in the government white paper on energy 12 years ago. And 12 years later, they are now setting up an interministerial task committee to put in place a 20-year integrated resource plan which should have been in place several years ago. So I'm not denying that what is being done is right. It is right to do it. But unfortunately, we are catching up extremely late. We are 2.5 years into the energy crisis. And the fact that we don't have an integrated resource plan in place now, in fact, that it was not in place 2 years ago, is a national scandal. Yes, it looks like people are getting the message and putting in place what they should have put in place many years ago, and let's hope it happens. We've seen delays in implementation of policy of up to 12 years. Let's hope that this thing is now going to happen.
An optimist might say that it's better late than never, and the Minister of Energy has promised that the Integrated Resources Plan 2 will be consultative and deal with a broader energy mix, including diversification away from coal to nuclear, gas and renewable energy. And after all, South Africa did pledge to reduce carbon emissions at the recent Copenhagen Climate Change Summit.
We have shown our proactiveness in this regard with the introduction of the Integrated Resource Plan 1. We call it Integrated Resource Plan 1 because we believed that post-Copenhagen, we would then have to come back as South Africa and engage a wider range of stakeholders to be able to develop a proper integrated resource plan that would speak to government infrastructure plans as well as to the private sector infrastructure plans, because it is important that when we talk about an integrated resource plan for South Africa, we talk about both the private and public sector input into it, because it is not enough to just speak about the government side and yet we call it South Africa's plan. We want a plan that can tell us what we would need, how it must be produced by the year 2020, 2030, 2050 and going forward. So we want a long-term plan and we want South Africans to participate in it.
It's certainly a very ambitious undertaking that we've given in Copenhagen, and if you realistically look at the reduction, then you look at solar, you look at wind, biomass, but nuclear as a base load is certainly seen by many countries as the solution to reduce the carbon footprint.
But even if a proper 20-year plan is put in place, another disaster looms in the distance. This is the country's distribution network. While municipalities have been charging consumers for power to keep streets clean and other public services, they haven't been spending much on the infrastructure which distributes that power. And this has to do with another plan not implemented years ago, the regional electricity system.
On the electricity distribution side, municipal networks continue to represent the most critical risk to the distribution supply chain, as networks deteriorate due to lack of adequate maintenance and refurbishment. The poor state of distribution networks is accompanied by increasing costs due to tariff increases as we make capital investments, threatening the competitiveness of industry and the livelihoods of the poor and indigent.
The formation of the REDS has been mandated for some time, and hopefully the legislation will be passed this year which will allow it to proceed. I know that there are a lot of municipalities who are in favour of it. Some of the municipalities which make a lot of money off it are not necessarily in favour of it because they see themselves losing out on potentially one of their biggest cash earners. And I think the fact that a lot of municipalities use electricity sales to subsidize the other services that they offer is also a problem. You know, electricity rates that we are charged are not necessarily cost reflective. That is definitely the next sort of big area that we need to target in the country. I think that the distribution infrastructure and the formation of the REDS is another large important topic or project to tackle, because we will see a lot of problems in the future if we don't sort that out.
But let's deal with one problem at a time, shall we?
It'll only be in July when the Integrated Resources Plan 2 is formulated that South Africa and the region will have a clear idea of the country's power security for the coming decades. For now, though, South Africans remain in the dark.